Every 10 seconds, the world changes not through war or invasion, but through birth rates. Across dozens of countries on every continent, a silent and often irreversible transformation is underway. Governments avoid the topic. Media rarely covers it. Yet history shows us that such demographic shifts end either peacefully, through management and policy, or violently, through conflict and displacement. This video explores why every pluralistic democracy must address these changes now, before they become crises. It examines the mathematics behind population trends, draws on historical and contemporary case studies from around the world, and discusses what policies might ensure a stable, pluralistic future, regardless of which country you call home. To understand the stakes, we must begin with pure demographic mathematics. A population sustains itself at a fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman. Below that number, a community shrinks. Above it, it grows. According to the Pew Research Center, the current global average fertility rates by religious community are the following. Christian majority communities average 2.6 children per woman, Buddhist communities 1.6, and Muslim communities 3.1. These figures are global averages and vary significantly by region, education level, and economic development. But the divergence, when projected forward 50 years, becomes civilizational in scale. The implications for social cohesion, political stability, and national identity are profound. In mixed religion, mixed culture societies, of which there are now dozens across every continent, ignoring these trends is not a neutral act. It is a choice. And history tells us it is rarely a safe one. This phenomenon is not new. History is filled with examples of communities that were demographically displaced, not by force, but by diverging birth rates sustained across generations. These are not ancient stories. They are living wounds that continue to shape nations today. Lebanon. In 1932, Lebanon conducted its last national census. At that time, Christians formed a majority of the population, approximately 55%. The Lebanese state was built on this demographic reality, enshrined in a power-sharing agreement known as the National Pact, which allocated political positions, the presidency, the prime ministership, the speakership of parliament, along sectarian lines. Today, Christians make up less than 30% of the population. The National Pact, once a model for pluralistic coexistence, now struggles to function because its demographic foundations no longer exist. Lebanon's political dysfunction, economic collapse, and recurring civil conflict cannot be fully understood without understanding this. Kosovo. Kosovo was, within living memory, a majority Serbian Orthodox region. Through the second half of the 20th century, Albanian Muslim communities, with significantly higher birth rates, became the overwhelming majority. The result was not peaceful integration, but escalating conflict, the Kosovo War of 1998-99, NATO military intervention, and the eventual declaration of independence, a territory that Serbia still regards it as the cradle of its national identity. The lesson is stark. Demographic shifts, when left unaddressed, can translate directly into political and territorial rupture. Cyprus. Cyprus has been divided since 1974, split between Greek Cypriots in the south and Turkish Muslims in the north. A UN buffer zone, the Green Line, still bisects Nicosia, making it the last divided capital city in Europe. The wall stands not as a monument to ancient trade, but as the physical expression of unresolved demographic tension. Decades of negotiation have produced no resolution. The division persists. Lebanon, Kosovo, and Cyprus are not historical footnotes. They are active, ongoing reminders that demographic imbalance, left unmanaged, does not resolve itself. It calcifies, it fractures, and it bleeds. France. France presents one of the most vivid contemporary examples of demographic anxiety. Within a liberal democracy, in the Greater Paris metropolitan region, over 10% of births are now to Muslim families. In some suburban communes, the banlieues, that figure exceeds 50%. France's tradition of republican assimilation, the idea that all citizens shed their communal identities and become simply French, is under severe strain, as demographic concentration increasingly defines social, geographic, and political divides. France is not unique in Europe. It is simply the country where the tension has become most politically visible most recently. Sweden. Sweden, long celebrated as the world's most successful welfare state, built on exceptionally high social trust and cultural cohesion, accepted over 1.6 million migrants between 2010 and 2023, predominantly from Muslim-majority nations. The social model that Swedes built over generations was designed for a high-trust, culturally homogeneous society. It was not designed to absorb, at speed, communities with fundamentally different values, family structures, and birth rates. The consequences are measurable. Gang violence in Malmö and Gothenburg has become a national emergency. Political parties campaigning on immigration restrictions have moved from the fringes to the center of government. Sweden is not a story of failure. It is a story of a society discovering in real time the limits of good intentions. South Asia. South Asia offers perhaps the most numerically dramatic contemporary example. In several nations of the subcontinent, Muslim population shares have grown significantly since the mid-20th century, while Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, and Christian minorities have contracted, in some cases to near disappearance, through a combination of higher birth rates, emigration, and in some cases active discrimination or violence. In Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, the non-Muslim minority share of the population has collapsed within living memory. Across South Asia, demographic change is not a future projection. It is a present political reality. Israel and Palestine. In no place on earth is demographic strategy more explicit or more openly acknowledged than in Israel and Palestine. Israeli strategic planners openly discuss the demographic threat posed by higher Palestinian Arab birth rates. Palestinian political leaders have, at times, explicitly described population growth as a form of resistance, a non-violent weapon in a very long war. The entire architecture of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the two-state solution, the one-state debate, the question of who controls which territory, cannot be separated from demographic arithmetic. Here, numbers function as geopolitical facts. The Pew Research Center's landmark study, The Future of World Religions, projects that by 2050, Muslims will nearly equal Christians as a share of the global population, rising from 23% to approximately 30% of all people on Earth. In Europe specifically, the Muslim share of the population is projected to double from 4.9% to over 10%, even under moderate migration scenarios. These projections predate the major migration surges of the mid-2010s and early 2020s. The actual trajectory may be steeper. The 2021 census in England and Wales recorded a historic milestone. For the first time since records began, people identifying as Christian fell below 50%, from 59% in 2011 to 46% in 2021. In the same period, the Muslim population grew from 4.4% to 6.5%. If these trends continue through 2 or 3 more census cycles, the UK's cultural, institutional, and legal landscape will look profoundly different from the one in which its current institutions were designed. Across all these cases, from Europe to South Asia to the Middle East, the pattern is consistent. Institutions built on one demographic reality are being asked to function in a fundamentally different one. When the population changes faster than institutions can adapt, the result is not a smooth transition. It is tension, fracture, and, in the worst cases, violence. What can be done? The answer is emphatically not walls, mass deportations, or ethnic cleansing. These are not only morally indefensible, they are also historically counterproductive. The answer being cautiously discussed by political philosophers, demographers, and policy architects is a structured demographic rights framework, a legal and policy architecture that ensures no single community, in any pluralistic society, can use reproduction as a mechanism of political displacement. The goal is not to punish any group for having children. The goal is to establish, in law and in civic culture, a principle of demographic equilibrium, the idea that in a shared and civic space, all communities have equal rights, including the right not to be erased. The Chinese model. China's one-child policy is a controversial but instructive reference point. However harsh its enforcement, and the abuses were real and well documented, the policy was rooted in a clear-eyed recognition that unchecked population growth in a constrained society produces catastrophic outcomes. It is not a model to be replicated. It is evidence that states have acted, and can act, on demographic reality when they choose to. The Singapore model. Singapore offers a far more instructive and humane model. The government actively manages ethnic demographic ratios in public housing through its ethnic integration policy, ensuring that Chinese, Malay, and Indian communities remain geographically distributed rather than clustering into ethnically homogeneous enclaves. Singapore demonstrates that demographic management need not be coercive, discriminatory, or unjust. It can be sophisticated, transparent, and effective. The Bhutanese model. Bhutan has enacted some of the world's strictest citizenship and residency laws, explicitly designed to preserve Bhutanese Buddhist cultural identity. The approach has been controversial, but the underlying impulse, that a small nation has the right to protecting its cultural character, is one that most countries exercise in some form, however quietly. The Western gap. What liberal Western democracies have largely failed to do is articulate any equivalent framework. The very suggestion is treated as racist, despite the fact that protecting minority cultural communities from demographic displacement is, by definition, a minority rights concern as much as a majority one. Tax and incentive structures. Tax and benefit structures could be designed to be reproduction neutral, neither penalizing small families nor providing open-ended financial incentives for very large ones, regardless of religion or ethnicity. Capping such benefits at 3 or 4 children is not discriminatory. It treats all families by the same rule. Civic education. Civic education can frame family size as a shared social responsibility rather than a purely private or religious decision. This is not about telling people how many children to have. It is about building a civic culture in which all citizens, regardless of faith, understand that they share a common society whose long-term stability depends on demographic balance. Transparent demographic monitoring. Transparent demographic monitoring is perhaps the most important and least controversial tool available. By publishing demographic data openly, debating it without taboo, and building it into long-term policy planning, societies empower their citizens to make informed, democratic choices. The raw material exists. What is missing is the political will to discuss what the data shows. Immigration policy. Immigration policy can explicitly incorporate demographic balance as one criterion, alongside economic and humanitarian considerations. Canada's points-based the immigration system already does this implicitly. Making the demographic dimension explicit and transparent would not be a departure from best practice. It would be an honest acknowledgement of what thoughtful immigration policy already does. None of these policies restrict religious practice. None of them suggest that any community's children are worth less than another's. They assert a single, simple principle. In a shared civic space, the right to have as many children as one wishes is a personal freedom. But it does not carry a corresponding right to use that freedom to demographically displace fellow citizens from their own country. Objection 1. This is racism in disguise. The most common objection is that demographic policy is racism in different clothing. It is not. Demography is not race. The argument applies with equal force to any community, religious, ideological, or otherwise, that concentrates reproduction in ways that destabilize pluralism. If any fundamentalist community of any faith were demographically displacing a minority in any country, the same framework would apply. Neutral means neutral. Objection 2. Reproduction is a fundamental right. The second objection is that reproduction is a fundamental human right and therefore cannot be subject to policy intervention. This is true, reproduction is a fundamental right. But so is the right of an existing community to cultural survival. The Declaration of Human Rights protects both. When these rights conflict, as they do, in practical terms, in mixed societies with divergent birth rates, the democratic response is to build frameworks that mediate the conflict, not to pretend the conflict does not exist. Objection 3. Birth rates will naturally converge. The third objection is that Muslim birth rates will naturally converge downward as education levels rise and prosperity spreads. This is partially true, and the data does support it in some contexts and over some timescales. But eventually is not a policy. Demographic displacement occurs within 1 or 2 generations before convergence has time to operate. In communities where religious doctrine actively discourages contraception and encourages large families as a spiritual duty, the convergence thesis may not apply at all on any relevant timescale. History will not judge democracies by their willingness to fight external enemies. It will judge them by their willingness to have honest conversations with themselves about what they are, what they want to remain, and what they are willing to do to protect it. The communities of Lebanon, Kosovo, and Cyprus did not lose their demographic footing because of hatred or external conquest. They lost it because they failed to count, literally and figuratively. They assumed that coexistence was self-sustaining. They assumed that democracy alone would protect them from displacement. They were wrong. Their stories are warnings addressed to every pluralistic democracy in the world today. The question before every mixed society democracy is not, should we fear our neighbors? The question is, do we believe in the long-term survival of pluralism? Enough to protect it with law, with policy, and with honest democratic debate rather than leaving it to demographic chance? Because demographic chance, right now, is not running in the direction of diversity. Without active protection, pluralism does not persist. It yields gradually and irreversibly to the community most willing to treat reproduction as a long-term political strategy. Pluralism is a value. Like all values, it must be actively chosen and actively defended. Demographic balance laws are not about exclusion. They are not about fear. They are about the belief, translated into practical policy, that every community in every mixed society deserves a future.